Mississippi, 1854. The storm began at dusk, tearing the magnolia branches from their roots and staining the river white with silt. The fields vanished beneath water, and thunder rolled across the delta like God dragging his chains through the clouds. Inside the Harlan Plantation, the lamps flickered, the walls groaned, and a single scream rose above the storm. They said the river wasn't the only thing that turned white that night. When the midwife, Ada Cole, pushed open the chamber door, she saw a sight she would never forget. A newborn child, silent and ghostly pale, lying on blood-soaked sheets that somehow looked darker beside him. The baby's skin glowed faintly in the candlelight, smooth as porcelain, almost translucent. His eyes were open, clouded blue, like rainwater before it falls. The mother, a house servant named Clara, drifted in and out of consciousness. No one dared speak the father's name. The overseer had forbidden questions. Ada hesitated, but when she lifted the child, she swore she felt a pulse stronger than any she'd ever held, like two hearts beating in one tiny chest. By morning, the rain had stopped, but no one celebrated. Word spread across the quarters before sunrise. A white child was born in the slave house. Some said it was the mistress's secret child. Others whispered that lightning itself had fathered him. When the master, William Harlan, returned that evening, the house was silent. His wife sat beside an empty cradle, staring at a single strand of hair she had found on the pillow. Not gold, not brown, but pure white. The next day, the baby was gone. The midwife disappeared into the cypress woods. The mistress locked herself in her chamber, praying without words, and for the first time in years, even the birds stopped singing near the plantation. Some stories begin with miracles. Others begin with warnings. But this one begins with a question. If a child is born untouched by color, is he closer to God or something far older than God himself? If that question chills you, stay with me. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were Ada that night? Would you have saved the child? Or buried the truth? Make sure you subscribe, because what happened next in Yazoo County was buried for over a century until the attic walls began to speak again. The rain stopped, but the mud held its silence like a secret. For 3 days, no one spoke of the baby. The house stood heavy with damp, its windows shuttered, though the sun had returned. Even the horses refused to drink from the troughs, as if they too sensed what had been hidden beneath that roof. On the 4th day, a doctor arrived from Natchez, a small man named Dr. Everett Poe, known for treating the rich and the dying in equal measure. He was summoned discreetly by the master, who met him at the gate before the servants could see. The doctor's carriage wheels sank deep into the wet earth as he stepped down, gloved and impatient. Inside, the air smelled of camphor and something else, something metallic, faintly sweet. In the upper corridor, the mistress waited, pale and unmoving, her rosary clutched tight enough to draw blood from her palm. She led him to a narrow door at the end of the hallway. Behind it lay a small attic room, curtains drawn, one candle burning low, and in the corner, a cradle. Dr. Poe leaned closer. The child was there, breathing softly, motionless, eyes open. The skin was not sickly but luminous, white as unpolished marble. The irises were pale blue, almost grey, the eyelashes invisible. He touched the infant's wrist. The pulse was steady, strong. He lifted the child's eyelid, examined the mouth, the gums, the scalp. Then he stepped back, silent. Finally, the master spoke. "Is it human?" Dr. Poe didn't answer. He reached into his case, withdrew a small lancet, and pricked the child's heel. A drop of blood welled up, darker than he expected. He placed it on a slide, squinted under the magnifying glass he carried from town. "His pigment cells are missing," he said quietly. "But his blood, it's not the mother's, nor yours." The mistress inhaled sharply. The candle trembled in her hand. Dr. Poe looked at them both. "I'll write a note. You'll keep it safe, and you'll never speak of this to anyone." He left before dinner. The master followed him to the gate, his boots sinking into the mud again. "What do I tell her?" he asked. The doctor adjusted his gloves. "Tell her it was stillborn." Then, lowering his voice, "And if the child breathes after midnight, bury it anyway." The carriage rolled away down the flooded road, wheels creaking like bones. The master stood in the rain until the sound disappeared. When he returned to the house, the candle in the attic was out, and the cradle was empty once more. He thought he saw something moving near the staircase, a flicker of white, like fabric or skin. But when he reached for it, there was nothing. The following night, the mistress began to hear the child again. At first, she thought it was the wind, a soft, uneven cry slipping through the rafters, rising and falling with the breath of the house. But when she pressed her ear against the wall, she swore she could hear it more clearly. A faint cooing, followed by the rustle of fabric, as though something shifted just beyond the plaster. She sent for her maid, who came running, half asleep and frightened. "Do you hear that?" the mistress whispered. The maid listened, but the house was silent. Only the crackle of the dying fire answered. When the mistress insisted, the girl crossed herself and muttered, "Ma'am, the attic's been locked since yesterday. Nobody's there." The mistress dismissed her, then walked alone through the corridor, barefoot on the cold boards. Her candle trembled with each step. The house smelled of wax and wet earth, and every door seemed to breathe as she passed. At the end of the hall, she paused before the attic stairs. The key was missing. Still, the sound persisted, a child's whimper, almost pleading. She pressed her hand to the wood and whispered, "I'm here." The crying stopped. That silence broke her. By dawn, her husband found her in the nursery sitting on the floor, cradling a bundle of blankets that held nothing but air. Her lips moved soundlessly. When he tried to touch her shoulder, she screamed. For days, she refused food. She tore at her rosary until beads scattered across the floor like drops of dark glass. When the preacher came, she would not look at him. "The child isn't gone," she said. "He's in the walls." The master called her mad. But servants whispered she wasn't wrong. At night, they said they saw the curtains stir in rooms with no windows open. They heard small footsteps on the ceiling beams. Sometimes, a faint hum, not quite crying, not quite laughter. One afternoon, the mistress ordered every mirror in the house covered. "The reflections lie," she said. "He doesn't appear in them, but I can feel when he's near." In the evenings, she began writing notes on torn pages, from her Bible verses, rearranged, words crossed out until they meant something else entirely. "The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not." By the second week, she no longer slept. The servants refused to enter her room, and when her husband tried to take the Bible from her hands, he found that every verse about angels had been blotted out, every one except a single line, underlined in shaking ink. And they were not born of man, nor of the will of flesh, but of God. The overseer's name was Silas Crow, a man whose silence was worth more than his loyalty. He had worked the Harlan Plantation for 12 years, long enough to know that every family kept its ghosts behind locked doors. But he also knew that secrets could be harvested, like cotton. You only needed the right season to pick them. It was late spring when Silas first saw the boy. He had gone to the attic to fix a loose beam after the storm. The air was heavy with dust, and dried herbs the mistress had hung to ward off sickness. As he knelt to hammer the board, he heard breathing shallow, rhythmic, close. Turning, he saw movement in the corner, where the wall met the chimney. A pair of eyes stared back at him, pale grey-blue, unblinking. For a moment, Silas thought he'd stumbled upon a ghost. Then, the child stepped into the thin light. He was older now, maybe a year, maybe 2. His hair was white as flax, his skin unmarked by sun or scar. But what struck Silas most was not the color, it was the gaze. The boy looked at him as though he had always known who he was. "Does your father know you're up here?" Silas asked, half mocking. The boy tilted his head. "He's not my father." Silas froze. The voice was quiet, clear, too clear. That night, he went to the master's office with a bottle of bourbon and a plan. "I've seen your secret," he said. "The one in the attic." The master didn't answer, only stared at the fire. "I could tell the county," Silas continued. "Or I could forget it for a price." He named a sum that would have bought 20 men their freedom. The master poured himself another drink. "You'll get nothing," he said flatly. "Not from me." Silas smiled thinly. "Then maybe I'll speak to the mistress. I hear she's partial to angels." The crack of the pistol was softer than thunder, but in the quiet of that night, it felt louder than God's voice. The bullet grazed Silas's shoulder, enough to send him stumbling backward, not enough to kill. "Leave," the master said. Before I bury you next to what you think you saw, Silas left. But he didn't leave Mississippi. He kept his wound clean, his anger cleaner. And weeks later, when the Harlan's livestock began dying one by one, their throats untouched, but their blood drained, Silas told the others in town exactly what he'd seen. By harvest season, every man in Yazoo County had heard the same whisper. The Harlans keep a ghost child in their attic. It feeds on the living. By midsummer, the story had traveled farther than the river itself. In the smoke of the tavern at Yazoo Junction, men spoke the Harlan name with lowered voices, as though even the air might repeat them. They said the master had angered God, that a ghost child had come to drink the blood of his herds, and soon would drink his own. The preacher from Street Mary's called it nonsense at first, but when he rode past the plantation one afternoon, he saw something that settled deep in his bones. Every window of the mansion boarded shut, though the heat was merciless, and above the roof, hanging from the attic window, a white sheet fluttered, not tied, but nailed the way one seals a tomb. That Sunday, he spoke to his congregation. There are things in this county that were not born of woman, he warned. Things that mock creation. The church was silent. Then someone asked, "Are you talking about the Harlans?" He didn't answer, but the sermon spread faster than scripture. By harvest, no one would trade with the Harlans. Wagons passed their fields without slowing. The blacksmith refused their tools. Even the postman stopped delivering letters. The mistress's roses withered. The servants left. Only the river and the wind kept visiting. One evening, Sheriff Dalton rode out to the plantation, claiming it was his duty to investigate the disturbances. The master met him at the gate, his face grey with exhaustion. "There are no disturbances," he said. "Only talk." Dalton leaned in. "Talk can hang a man in this county." The master didn't move. "I'll remind them of the law," the sheriff said finally. But he didn't sound sure. He turned his horse to leave and stopped. From somewhere inside the house came a faint hum, a child's voice, humming a lullaby without words. Dalton stared at the windows, all sealed tight. "Who's singing?" he asked. The master said nothing. When the sheriff rode back to town, he told no one what he'd heard. But his hands shook as he lit his pipe, and the next morning he left Yazoo County for good. The preacher took his place in spreading the tale. He said the river itself had cursed the Harlan bloodline, that a child of light had been sent as punishment for sins buried under that soil. Soon, women began crossing themselves when thunder rolled. Children dared each other to run past the gates at dusk, and the field hands who stayed behind swore that at night they saw a figure walking the veranda, small, white-haired, humming softly to itself. Not all stories need to be true to be feared, but in Yazoo County, fear always had a way of becoming truth. By late autumn, the Yazoo River had turned restless again. It no longer flowed in its steady brown silence, it whispered. Farmers downstream claimed the current changed direction at night, crawling backward toward the Harlan Plantation like something being pulled home. The water near the old ferry crossing carried a strange shimmer under moonlight, not oil, not silt. Some said it looked like powdered bone, others said it was milk. The master rode out one morning to inspect his lower fields. He found the soil slick and pale, as if bleached. The cotton stalks had wilted overnight, their roots soggy, their bolls soft and colorless. When he cut one open, the lint inside was not white, but translucent like spun glass. He dropped it in disbelief. It dissolved when it touched the water. That evening, he sat on the porch, staring at the swollen river. The sun set red, the water turned silver, and the first frogs of the season fell silent halfway through their croak. The air itself seemed to listen. Then came the smell. It rose from the riverbank, faintly sweet, faintly rotten, the same scent Dr. Poe had noticed months before, the scent that clung to the child. The master stood, gripping the rail. "What do you want from me?" he muttered to the darkness. The answer came from below. A ripple, then another, then dozens. The river was boiling, but no wind stirred its surface. From the woods came a single note, the cry of a whippoorwill, then silence. The next morning, the master ordered the field hands to build a levee. But as they dug, one man's shovel struck something solid just beneath the surface, a plank, and beneath it, bone, human. A second strike revealed another. And another. The men stopped digging. The master turned pale. "Cover it," he said. "Sir," one of them whispered. "There's writing on it." The plank bore letters carved in uneven hand. Clara. The master staggered backward. "Burn it," he said. "Now." But before they could move, the wind shifted. The river rose again, not with rain, but with bubbles, each one releasing a faint hiss, like breath escaping from below. The men fled. That night, the river breached its banks and swept through the lower field. When it receded, every crop, every fence post, every animal track was gone, leaving behind only a white film across the earth, fine as dust, glittering under moonlight. The preacher would later call it the debt of the river. He said it had come to collect what men had tried to bury. The storm had passed, but the house no longer slept. Its walls creaked at night, as though something inside them shifted with every breath of wind. The servants who remained took turns keeping watch, though none lasted more than a few nights before leaving for good. On the second night after the flood, a young maid named Ruth stayed behind to tend to the mistress. She was 17, quiet, the daughter of a field hand who died in the sickness the year before. At midnight, she heard a sound, a faint tapping from the upper floor. Steady, rhythmic, almost like someone knocking gently from inside a wall. She tried to ignore it, but the sound came again, softer this time, followed by a whisper. Her candle flame bent toward the window, as if drawn by a draft. Then she saw it. In the reflection of the glass, not behind her, but in the pane itself, stood a small boy. White hair, white nightshirt, bare feet, eyes the color of a cold morning. He didn't move. He only watched. Ruth turned, heart hammering, but the hallway behind her was empty. When she looked back, the reflection was gone, yet the window's frost had begun to form, the outline of a handprint, 5 perfect fingers pressed into the glass from the other side. She ran to the mistress's room. Eleanor was awake, sitting upright, staring at the door as if she'd been waiting. "You saw him," she said calmly. Ruth nodded, trembling. "He was at the window." The mistress smiled faintly. "He watches when the river rises." Then, softer, "He never leaves." The girl tried to light another candle, but the flame wouldn't hold. The air was too still, too heavy. From outside came a soft creak, the sound of a window opening somewhere above them. When the master rushed upstairs, he found the attic window unlatched, the curtains billowing inward, though there was no wind. On the sill lay small footprints, dry and pale, leading inward, not out. He searched every corner of the attic, every trunk, every shadow. Nothing. But as he turned to leave, something glimmered near the cradle, a thin thread of white hair caught in the wood. He plucked it free and held it to the light. It shone like silver wire. He burned it immediately in the candle flame, but the wick went out instead. Downstairs, Ruth sat shivering by the hearth, whispering the same phrase again and again. "He was looking at me, sir," but not like a child. Like he was counting. No one slept in the house after that. The windows were nailed shut, the attic sealed again. Yet each morning, when the sun rose, a new handprint appeared on the glass smaller than before, as if fading or sinking deeper into the pane. Nearly 20 years after the Harlan Plantation fell silent, a box of letters surfaced in the estate of a physician who died alone in Natchez, Dr. Everett Poe. The papers were brittle with age, sealed with wax that had long since cracked. They were found by his niece, who donated them to the county archives. For decades, no one opened them, until a historian in 1912 broke the seal and began to read. The first letter was dated the 3rd of May, 1854, only a week after the child's birth. The specimen exhibits complete absence of melanin, yet I have never encountered such blood. It clots in patterns hexagonal, deliberate, as if obeying geometry rather than biology. The second letter, written in hurried script, carried a tone of alarm. The blood resists separation. It forms 2 layers, one dark, one pale, as though 2 hearts beat within one body. The darker layer reacts violently to light, the pale one to heat. I cannot explain this. It is not possible. The third letter was never sent. It bore no address, only a smudge where the ink had bled through the paper. I returned to the Harlan house tonight. The master says the child does not sleep. He stares into mirrors and they cloud over. The mother, the servant, is missing. I told him to keep the boy in darkness. I fear sunlight would show us something we are not meant to see. The final letter was written a year later, dated 1855, and addressed to a colleague in New Orleans. I write to you in secrecy. The child survives. He has not aged as he should. His hair grows, but his skin remains without blemish, without decay. When he cuts himself, the wound closes without trace. I have taken a sample again, the same dual composition. I believe the darker portion may be not blood, but memory. The historian who read those words reportedly burned the letter that same night. Only fragments survived in the record, copied by hand before the fire reached the edge of the page. He does not belong to us. He belongs to what came before us. After the letters became public, the legend of the Harlan child returned to Mississippi's newspapers, half folklore, half medical curiosity. But one note, scrawled in the doctor's last journal entry, was rarely mentioned. It was written in trembling ink, in a single line repeated several times down the page. He remembers me. It was the summer of 1872 when Reverend Silas Boone returned to Yazoo County. He was an old man by then, eyes clouded, hands trembling, drawn not by duty, but by the sound of his own unfinished sermon echoing somewhere inside him. The Harlan Plantation had been abandoned for nearly 2 decades. The house stood hollow, its upper floors caved in. The veranda collapsed beneath ivy and rot. The river had changed course long ago, leaving a ribbon of pale sand where the lower fields once lay. The preacher dismounted at the old gate and stood listening. He expected silence. Instead, he heard dripping, soft, steady, measured, as though the land itself still breathed beneath the ruin. He crossed the threshold. The air was thick with dust and the faint sweetness of decay. A rosary hung from a doorknob, its beads fused together by time. In the parlor, a portrait lay face down on the floor. The frame had cracked clean through, dividing the faces of husband and wife. The preacher climbed the stairs, step by careful step, until he reached what had once been the nursery. The door was half rotted, the hinges giving way at his touch. Inside, the cradle remained smaller than he remembered, almost shrunken with age. A thin layer of white powder covered everything, like frost in midsummer. He knelt beside it and touched the dust. It clung to his fingers and shimmered faintly in the shaft of light from the broken roof. It wasn't dust at all. It was salt. Outside, near the riverbank, he found a small mound of earth, a grave that bore no stone, only a plank bleached by years of Sunday. The letters carved into it were nearly gone, but he could still make out one word, Clara. He bowed his head, murmured a prayer. But as he rose, he noticed the soil had darkened beneath his feet. From the center of the mound seeped a slow trickle of pale liquid, thick as milk, moving steadily toward the river. He backed away, heart pounding. The liquid wound through the grass, gathering into a single thin stream. It reached the water and vanished beneath the surface. Then the current shivered, not outward, but inward, toward the house. The preacher fell to his knees. "Lord," he whispered, "if this is judgment, let it fall on me too." He remained there until dusk. When he finally turned to leave, he saw something in the highest window of the ruined house, a faint glow, like a candle, though the glass had long been shattered. For a moment he thought it might be the setting Sunday. Then the light moved. A small figure stood silhouetted in the window, head bowed as if in prayer. The preacher raised a trembling hand. "Child?" The figure lifted its face. White, featureless, watching. The preacher stumbled back, clutching his cross. But when he looked again, the window was empty. Only the reflection of the river remained shining pale against the night, like an open eye that refused to close. The last surviving witness to the Harlan affair was an old woman named Ruth Daniels. She lived in a small shack near Vicksburg, surrounded by rose bushes that bloomed all year, no matter the season. When a journalist from New Orleans found her in 1894, she was 80, blind in one eye, and still wearing a cross made of riverwood. He came to ask about the rumors, the white child, the flood, the river that turned to milk. She agreed to speak, but only after sundown. "The night listens better," she said. He recorded her words as she spoke, her voice fragile but unwavering. "I was there when the river rose. I saw the child with my own eyes. People said he was a ghost, but ghosts don't breathe. He breathed. He looked at me like he could see everything I'd ever done." The reporter asked what happened to him. Ruth smiled, a sad, faraway smile. "He didn't die, sir. He changed. You see, when the river came, it wasn't to drown us. It came to take him back. That boy wasn't meant for this earth. He was borrowed. She paused, listening to the wind through her garden. The master tried to bury him, but the ground wouldn't take him. The mother, Clara, she went looking for him in the flood. Some say she found him. I think he found her. The reporter asked what she meant. Ruth leaned forward, her blind eye catching the lantern light. Sometimes at night I still see them. Not in dreams, in the glass of my window. A woman standing in the shallows, holding a child, both shining white, like moonlight underwater. The journalist pressed her for proof. A grave, a record, anything. She laughed softly. Records burn, graves wash away, but truth don't drown. It just changes its shape. He asked what became of the house. It's gone, she said. The river took it piece by piece. But some nights, when the fog's right, folks say you can still see the upper floor floating in the mist, and in the window, a light. Always one light. The journalist thanked her. But as he packed his notes, Ruth added one final line, spoken almost to herself. He's still here, just not in flesh. He's the color that ain't got a name, the color that happens right before dawn. When the article was published weeks later, the editor removed that last sentence, calling it superstition. But Ruth's testimony survived in her own handwriting, left in the margins of her Bible beside a single verse. And the light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. In the spring of 1912, a young historian from Jackson named Thomas Alden arrived in Yazoo County with a notebook, a camera, and a fascination for the unsolved. He had read the old clippings, Dr. Poe's letters, Reverend Boone's journals, and the now famous testimony of Ruth Daniels. His goal, he wrote in his diary, was to separate fact from fear. The locals warned him not to go near the river. They said the water there was wrong, too still, too bright. But Alden, a man of education, laughed it off. Folklore, he said, Mississippi's greatest export. He reached the old Harlan site at dusk. The house was gone, reclaimed entirely by the riverbank. But the foundation remained pale stones, half buried in the earth, forming a rough square under a layer of vines. When he stepped closer, he noticed the ground shimmered faintly under his boots. It wasn't dew. It was crystal-thin veins of white mineral that caught the fading light. He knelt, scraped a fragment into a jar, and wrote in his notes, "Composition unknown. Possibly salt or gypsum. Emits faint luminescence under shadow." As he set up his camera, he felt a low vibration in the ground, a subtle hum like distant machinery. The air thickened. The birds fell silent. He took 3 photographs, one of the river, one of the ruins, and one facing the tree line. Then the sun slipped below the horizon, and in the instant before darkness, he thought he saw something in the water. A reflection that didn't belong to him. It wasn't a face. Not exactly, more like a shape of light that moved when he didn't. He left soon after, uneasy but unconvinced. Back in Jackson, he developed the plates in his study. The first 2 came out as expected, empty ruins, river, stones. The third stopped his breath. In the photograph, the ruined foundation glowed faintly, as though lit from below, and in the center, near the remains of what had once been the attic window, stood 2 shadows, one of a man, clearly his own, and beside it, a smaller shape. The smaller one was standing closer to the camera, closer than it should have been. He examined the negative under magnification. No flaw, no double exposure. The small figure had defined edges, shoulders, head, and a faint outline of hair that shone white against the darkness. Alden tried to replicate it with new plates, new chemicals, new angles. Nothing. The figure refused to appear again. He wrote in his final report, "I set out to disprove a haunting, and found one instead. The light I saw was not reflected, it was remembering." The jar of white mineral he collected was later stored at the university lab. A decade afterward, when another researcher opened it, the sample had liquefied into a milky substance that evaporated on contact with air. The label on the jar simply read, "Harlan site sample lost." By the summer of 1952, Yazoo County had changed beyond recognition. The levees stood higher, the plantations had become farmland, and electricity had tamed most of the delta's darkness. But one thing, the river, refused to forget. That year, after 3 weeks of rain, the Yazoo rose again. Farmers woke to find the water glowing faintly under the early morning light. Not brown, not muddy, but the color of porcelain. One farmer, Elias Mercer, told the Clarion Ledger newspaper, "The whole river looked like someone poured milk in it. The fish floated up belly white, and the cattle wouldn't drink." At first, the local paper blamed industrial runoff, but when state officials arrived to test the water, they found no chemicals, only trace minerals consistent with salt and calcium carbonate. The lead scientist remarked, "This isn't contamination, it's composition." On July 3rd, a photographer from Jackson, Henry Locke, was sent to document the phenomenon. He set up his camera along the new levee, directly across from where the Harlan Plantation once stood. The river had reclaimed the site entirely, only the upper branches of old cypress trees marked the place where the house had been. Locke took a dozen photographs. Most showed nothing but pale water and grey sky. But one, the 11th plate, became infamous. When developed, it revealed what appeared to be a structure beneath the surface. Faint outlines of windows, stairs, and a pitched roof, glowing with the same milky hue as the river itself. Some said it was a trick of light. Others swore they saw a figure at one of the windows, small, white-haired, watching. The photo ran in the Clarion Ledger under the headline, "Ghost House Under the Yazoo. River Returns What History Forgot." The article went national within a week. Reporters, scientists, and tourists poured into Yazoo County. By the time they arrived, the glow had vanished. The river had returned to its normal, muddy color, as if embarrassed by its own confession. When questioned, Locke stood by his image. "It's not a reflection," he told the press. "It's something inside the water. Like the house never left, just sank deeper." One archivist later compared the photograph to Thomas Alden's 1912 plate and found the same alignment of shadows, the same faint distortion of light, and in both, at the upper center, the same glimmer, a pinpoint of brightness where the attic window would have been. That evening, Locke developed his final roll of film, one he hadn't shown the public. It was taken moments after the first photo, from the same spot. In it, the river was empty, except for a single ripple spreading outward from the center, perfectly circular, as if something had just risen, then gone again. He wrote a note on the back of the print before locking it away. It blinked. In 2003, a man named David Harlan contacted the Mississippi Historical Society, claiming to be a direct descendant of William and Eleanor Harlan. He was 42, a surveyor by trade, soft-spoken, educated, with the slow, deliberate voice of someone used to measuring both land and time. He said he wanted to lay a story to rest. David had spent years tracing property records and bloodlines, piecing together fragments that others had burned or forgotten. His grandmother, he said, never spoke of her maiden name. When she died, he found a small tin box among her things. Inside were two items: a child's lock of pure white hair and a photograph of the Yazoo River, faint outlines of a house glimmering beneath the surface. He believed that was where it began. In June 2004, he returned to Yazoo County with a handheld recorder and a modern soil sampling kit. His goal was to locate the foundation stones of the original Harlan Plantation, now buried under the levee's edge. The recording begins with the sound of boots crunching over gravel, followed by his calm narration. Coordinates match the old survey map. "I'm standing where the attic window would have faced the river. The ground looks dry, but the soil's lighter here, almost white." He digs. The microphone picks up the rasp of metal scraping stone. It's porous, chalky, smells like salt and something else, like rain on iron. Minutes pass, wind, birds, then silence. He exhales sharply. There's water seeping through the cracks, even though it hasn't rained in weeks. A pause. Hold on. There's something moving under the surface. Not water light, like a reflection, but there's no Sunday. The tape crackles. He breathes faster. It's getting brighter. It's a sharp intake of breath. Then, softly, "I think it knows my name. I think it knows my name." The recorder clicks off. 2 days later, searchers found his truck parked by the levee, keys still in the ignition, engine cold. Inside, on the passenger seat, lay his sampling jar empty, except for a faint white residue that shimmered when held to light. His body was never found. When authorities replayed the final section of the tape, they noticed something beneath his voice. A second, quieter sound. It wasn't static. It was humming, a child's lullaby, repeating in perfect rhythm with the flow of the Yazoo River. In 2019, a graduate researcher at the University of Mississippi named Elena Brooks began cataloging a collection known internally as the Yazoo Files. The archive contained 70 years of material donated by families across the county. Photographs, news clippings, personal letters, even reel-to-reel tapes from local radio stations that had once reported on the Milk River. She thought it was folklore until she noticed something strange. Every photograph taken near the Yazoo River, from 1912 to 2004, carried a faint anomaly when exposed to polarized light. Not a flaw, not a glare, a reflection, always the same. A small, pale figure, sometimes near water, sometimes behind glass, sometimes visible only as a distortion in the negative. Each image was taken decades apart, by different cameras, on different materials, yet the outline never changed. At first, Elena assumed it was coincidence, a trick of the lens, but when she inverted the exposure curve on her computer, the reflection sharpened. It wasn't a smudge at all. It had eyes. She wrote in her field notes, consistent humanoid outline in 47% of samples. Scale and position correspond to the same relative coordinates, approximately attic window height, relative to horizon. To confirm, she projected all the images onto a single transparency sheet. The alignment was exact. Every figure stood in the same place, watching from the same invisible vantage. Then she reviewed the sound recordings recovered from the Harlan estate. In 2004, David's missing tape among them. When amplified, a low pattern emerged beneath the hum, a sequence of 6 notes repeating endlessly, identical to a lullaby documented in Reverend Boone's 1872 diary. Elena played the loop through the lab speakers. The sound was soft, almost tender. But as she increased the volume, the frequency began to shift. A faint vibration rippled through the floor. The computer screen flickered. The overhead lights dimmed. She stopped the playback. For several seconds, the speakers remained alive, though the computer was disconnected. And then, from nowhere, a voice, not a man's, not a child's, but something between, whispered, "Don't look for me. I never left." The lab's motion sensor activated, capturing a still image of the empty room at that precise moment. In the reflection of the monitor screen, faint but visible, was a small silhouette, a figure standing behind her chair. The timestamp on the photo read 03, 17 amperes, M. The system logged no one else in the building. Elena sealed the files, transferred the data to physical print, and sent the box anonymously to the State Historical Archive with a handwritten note, "Destroy the digital copies." The reflection moves. Today, the box remains locked in a restricted vault, labeled Yazoo Closed Collection. Archivists say they sometimes hear faint humming through the metal case when the river floods. Today, the Yazoo looks ordinary. Brown water, slow current, catfish surfacing where the sun cuts through the trees. Trucks roll along the new highway, and the levee has been rebuilt twice since the flood of 1952. To most, it's just another stretch of the Mississippi Delta flat, humid, unremarkable. But every few years, when the rains return heavy and the wind turns cold, the river changes color again. Not everywhere, only near the old Harlan site. The water turns pale, almost translucent, as if stirred by something deep below. Locals call it the whitening. Fishermen say it happens at night, when the moon is full and the air is still enough for the sound to travel. They hear it drifting over the water, a low humming, the same 6-note pattern that's been whispered through generations. The county denies it. Scientists call it a mineral bloom, an optical illusion, a trick of silt and light. But those who've lived by the Yazoo long enough know better. They say if you stand by the levee at dawn, you can sometimes see the surface ripple without wind, a perfect circle spreading outward, as if something beneath has opened its eyes again. And in the reflection of that pale water, you might notice a shape beside your own, smaller, still, watching. No photograph ever captures it. No microphone records it for long. But everyone who's seen it describes the same feeling, that the air bends slightly around you, that the world takes one slow breath, waiting. Some say it's the child, still keeping vigil over the land that refused to bury him. Others believe it's memory itself, the river remembering what men tried to erase. Whatever it is, the Yazoo endures. It moves in silence through the same soil that once swallowed truth and gave back light. And every time it turns white, the past surfaces, not as punishment, but as reminder, because the river never forgets, and neither does what sleeps beneath it. So the next time you drive through Mississippi, if the rain begins to fall and the ditches start to shimmer white, stop and listen. The hum you hear isn't the wind. It's the sound of history, breathing, and waiting for someone brave enough to look down and ask the question that still has no answer. Was he ever gone?